privilege to have you all here with us today. I'm grateful for your presence. Well, the entire team, rather. We are grateful for your presence today. The Christian Social Ethics class of 2024, is hosting this panel discussion under the theme Gender Norm, Misogyny, and Family Life, a Caribbean Perspective. And we have invited some panelists to share with us, and a little later on in the program, we will introduce them to you. So as we begin our proceedings for this afternoon, I invite Sister Shioma Henry to lead us in.
Let us all stand. Good afternoon as we go to God in prayer. Dear God, we come to you in this moment, thanking you for allowing us to see this part of the day. We are aware that it's because of your will and because of your goodness why we are standing here. As we engage in this panel discussion, we pray, Lord, that you will inspire the presenters. You will empower them as they speak. That as we navigate this topic, that God, your spirit will inspire and enlighten all of us. That we, O God, may be open to new insights and new perspectives. May we not be judgmental in our approach, but may we humbly be open to engage in this discussion. We put this session, O God, into your hands, and we ask that you take full control. May we leave here a better people, a more loving and Christ-like people, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
So, welcome. And I know you are all anxiously awaiting to hear what our presenters have to say today. So at this time, I will just introduce our presenters to you. Our first presenter will be Dr. Heather Ricketts. Heather Ricketts is the Dean of the Faculty of Social Science at the University of the West Indies, Mona Campus, Jamaica. She holds degrees in sociology, social sciences, and development studies. Prior to becoming a dean, she served as deputy dean, and before that, head of the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work, where she has taught across the sociology, social policy, and social work programs. She is the holder of awards for teaching, research, and publications, and service to the university. In 2021, she was the recipient of the Vice Chancellor's Award for Excellence in the category of Service to the University Community. Dr. Ricketts' research and publications are mostly in the areas of applied sociology, focusing on gender in the labor market, time use, focusing largely on unpaid care and domestic work, and the measurement and analysis of living standards with implication for social policies. She is heavily engaged in public service and currently sits on the National Social Protection Committee, the steering committee of the Jamaican Survey of Living Conditions. She recently completed service on technical oversight committees for the review of the beneficiary identification system for the PACT program, and over the period of 2022 and 2023, she served on the technical oversight committee for the consideration of the introduction of unemployment insurance in Jamaica, which was recently announced by the finance minister as being introduced in Jamaica. As lead upon to the completion of the Jamaican's Vision 2030 National Developmental Plan, she chaired the Social Welfare and Vulnerable Group Task Force, which deliberates a comprehensive social welfare and social welfare system for Jamaica. Later in 2014, she sat on the Technical Oversight Committee for the design of a social protection system for Jamaica. And between 2015 and 2017, she served on the Labour Market Reform Commission and chaired its Social Protection Committee. Dr. Rickett is a Methodist and worshipped at the Sockstock Methodist Church, where she chaired the Organization and Education Committee and teaches Sunday school. She is married and has 2 adult children. Let us welcome our Dr. Rickett. Our second presenter will be Reverend Dr. Peter Hunter, OP. Father Peter is a lecturer and tutor in philosophy at the Blackfear Hall and teaches philosophy in this studium. He is also chaplain of the studium. He studied mathematics in Cambridge and philosophy and theology at Oxford, before obtaining a doctorate in philosophy from King's College, University of London. His current interests include the relationship between science and religion. Our second presenter, Reverend Dr. Father Terry. Our third presenter will be Mrs. Lynette Bassell. I didn't do your name justice, I'm sorry. Bassell is a gender justice advocate whose writing, community engagement, and research have helped to shape and advance the women's rights agenda in Jamaica and the Caribbean. This organizational work dates back to the 1970s, when, as a member of the Committee of Women for Progress, CWP, advocates led and a broad partnership led to maternity leaves law, which were secured in 1979. That organization's work also include pioneering the celebration of International Women's Day in Jamaica 46 years ago in 1978. The CWP in 1983 founded the Women's Resource and Outreach Center, which today celebrates its 41st birthday and remain active among women primarily in the Lyndhurst, Greenwich community along the Women's Empowerment Group. Lynette who remained active in research and advocacy and has published in the areas of Caribbean women history, colonial gender policy, and women organizational experience. She is a member of the Webster Memorial United Church, a grandmother of 3, with 1 daughter, Samura. We welcome our church presenter, Ms. Lynn. Now that we would have been introduced to our presenter, we will now give them the opportunity to share with us what they have prepared for today. Each presenter will present for 10 minutes with a 5 minutes to speak. So we invite our first.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jack. Good afternoon. Let me say a very warm good evening to all. I see Reverend Dr. Thomas, Principal, Reverend Dr. Karen Durant-McSweeney. I don't know if there are other tutors here at UTCWI. I see Reverend Thomas pointing, yes. Let me welcome as well, and also to the students and my fellow panelists, Reverend Father Dr. Peter Hunter, and Mrs. Lynette Vassell, who I know for a long time. And of course, yes, I'm coming to the tutor, Reverend Natalie Blake. Good afternoon, everyone, students. Thank you for having me, and let me thank Ms. Jack, Monique, for the invitation, which came on the 3rd of January. And when I saw the invitation, I said, oh, that is in April, far. Then Monday, I opened my email and saw her reminding me and telling me it's Wednesday. And I was like, oh my God. Anyway, so let us go. So, Monique, thank you very much. You're going to move my slides along. I thought I would make a PowerPoint presentation because I have a few visuals and numbers which I will share. And to speak numbers, I don't think we do justice to it in that form. But if you see, it would better be retained. I want to start with the meanings. We are talking today about gender norms, misogyny, and family life. I think we all understand what family life means, but the meanings of gender norms and misogyny, I thought I would just put up the definitions. So if you're following, gender norms really are the informal rules and those shared social expectations that distinguish expected behavior of men and women. Really, that's what it is. And gender norms are closely related to gender stereotypes. And stereotypes are these generalized notions that we have about groups of individuals. So there are stereotypes about men and stereotypes about women. Some women being softer, more nurturing, men being more, firmer. And so patterns of discipline, for example, and punishment. Lots of people talk about, certainly my generation and older speak about the persons who exacted discipline in the household tended to be the father. And, there was that firm division of labor there about what mothers and fathers did or what boys and girls did. Moving on to misogyny. That now is a sort of extreme form of sexism. And what misogyny really means is male supremacy. And it's a propagation of the disdain and prejudice against women and the perceived threats to the social order, which is a patriarchal social order. Some definitions give it as a hatred for women. I don't know, it sounds a bit strong, or certainly an attempt to maintain patriarchal societal values. And these are manifested in things like harassment, coercion, sexual harassment as well, and violence against women. So I want to move on from the definitions to looking a bit at structural inequalities. And I have separated the structural inequalities into 3 spheres, starting with the family and the household, where we see gender socialization there. There is the gender division of labor in many households. Today, we have, matured as societies, and we are not seeing as entrenched divisions of labor as we saw 20 or so years ago. But there still is the division of labor in households, with women being assigned to unpaid care work. So women do a lot of unpaid care work, domestic work in households. They cook, they wash, they clean, they look after children, they look after elderly, etc. We're not saying that men don't do this in households, but to a large extent, that's the responsibility or role of women. Quite a lot of unpaid care and domestic work, or certainly the management of unpaid care and domestic work, if women have household workers and so forth. Also, we see in households and in family life, intimate partner violence. There's a lot of violence in households, and I'm going to get to those slides a little later to show you what persons have said about gender-based violence and intimate partner violence, that it is really an entrenched feature of Caribbean society. It's shameful, as I read all of these different reports over time, it's shameful when you read that it is entrenched. Somebody defined it as being like rice and peas. It is as prevalent as rice and peas in Caribbean society. So we'll come to that. if we move away from the family life and households and go into the labor market, we see occupational sex segregation, which is the segregation of occupations according to sex. Yes, so men pursue particular kinds of occupations and work in particular industries, and women in another. And we see women mostly in service type occupations. In Jamaica, we have a larger percentage of females engaged in professional occupations, but they make up the bulk of teachers and nurses. And if you look across and you see the education sector, you will see that the vast majority of that sector is populated by women. There are also wage gaps in labor markets still. Men and women working for the same, doing the same kinds of work or working in the same arrangements and yet earning differently, with men having a premium over women. Then there is sexual harassment. And today I think we're seeing some of that harassment being even turned on men. You know, men are also experiencing it, but to a large extent, sexual harassment is experienced by women in the labor market. Males are still seen as providers, irrespective of whether they have lower levels of education than women, or they are engaged in lower or low paid work. They are still seen as providers, and there is still that pressure to provide that men carry. At the level of the community and society, we see the sexual objectification of women, and the media portrays it quite a bit, whether visually or certainly orally. There's also a virtual normalization of the culture of sexual harassment in the community and society, where, you know, men would hold on to young ladies. You know, I was driving coming from the university over here, I saw these two. I'm not sure if they are taxi drivers of the taxis or loader men, but you know, one of them held on to the hand of a young lady, pulling her now into you know, the car. So there's quite a bit of that taking place, and also gender-based violence, and we see it manifested in rape and the sexual abuse of women and girls. There is a big culture of silence, however, among male victims. So I'm saying that there are men who experience gender-based violence, but there is that culture of of silence, which is associated with their feeling a certain amount of stigma, experiencing and ridicule, you know. But nevertheless, we are seeing increasing reporting of gender-based violence. I want to move on to the realities and outcomes. So there we see, which I've been talking about, the gender gap. And we see for women, it's more of an uphill task. Can you imagine going uphill, and instead of a ball, that's something wrong that you're carrying more like a brick. It's harder to move forward. Also, the images of, you know, violence, intimate partner violence, or the exacting of power by men in relationships, sexual harassment on both sides, wage inequality, and also I highlighted in the bottom left corner the triple burden which many women carry of working, caring for families, and also for studying or even just doing unpaid work in the community. There is the recognition that gender inequality is something which we need to abhor and work towards dismantling. And so the Sustainable Development Goal 5 speaks to gender equality. The goal is to achieve gender equality and to empower all women and girls. And so what does that entail? It entails ending discrimination against women and girls, eliminating violence against them, eliminating all harmful practices such as child marriage. And there are some practices in the Caribbean of child marriage. Also to recognize and value unpaid care and domestic work, ensure women's participation and leadership in decision-making, and also ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. So SDG 5 is really our focus, and we are trying as Caribbean societies with stakeholders on board to achieve these targets and to be able to say at the end of the decade that we are far down the road. Now, we will not be able to end discrimination and eliminate any of these things by 2030, because that's really the end point of the SDGs, and it's already written all over that we are going to be delayed in terms of the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. I want to turn now to looking a bit at the socioeconomic realities in the Caribbean, and I'm singling out to a large extent Jamaica. I know that there are other islanders and country persons represented, because if I say Guyana island, you all will probably have my head, yes? So I know, I see Reverend smiling there, you know, I remember my friend Warren Benfield saying, Heather, how dare you say to talk about Caribbean islands and include Guyana in there, you know, years ago. And so I don't make that mistake anymore. But let's look at the reality, socioeconomic realities. And I'm using data from the Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions that I work with a lot. The latest report, which is 2021 report, tells us that the prevalence of poverty in Jamaica is close to about 17%. And it fluctuates widely, yes? And you could imagine later on, the measurement of in 2023 will no doubt show us that poverty has perhaps even gone up further, because we're dealing with the effects of COVID, the bounce back from COVID, with all of the supply chain challenges and the inflationary pressures that the entire globe is feeling. I don't know if when you go to the supermarket, you probably are barely able now to put food on the table. That, my experience is how expensive and what a larger proportion of your salary is now going into just purchasing food. So the prevalence of poverty is almost 17%. But it's 22% if we measure it for children. So 1 in every 5 children lives in poverty. If you look at the Program of Advancement through Health and Education for Jamaica, which is our premier social assistance program, 65% of the PATH beneficiaries are children. It's a massive, that's 2/3 of PATH are just children. If we look at poverty rates by sex of household head, we see that it's 19.4% for those who live in female-headed households versus 14% for those who live in male-headed households. And if we compare that with Barbados, the figures are similar, 21% for female-headed households and 14% for male-headed households. I'm going back now to 2019 data because it is the last data available on early childhood development. And that's why I take 2019 and I didn't have 2021 because we didn't capture early childhood development then. Look at father figure in household. You know that we are societies that are matrifocal, female-headed households we are to a large extent in the Caribbean, but 36% of children, young children, 0 to 8, have no father figure in their household. They live with no father figure. And in the Kingston metropolitan area, it is 40%. But look at mother figure. 85% of them have their birth mother. About 10% have their grandmother. So 2% of children 0 to 8 have their mother, have no mother figure. 2 compared with 36%. So you understand the absence of father. I mean, father could be living elsewhere, but we want fathers, if they are living elsewhere, to still perform their father duties. And these data are very important for all of you who are, you know, pastors or becoming pastors and ministers, or workers who work in communities and with communities. So you understand some of the challenges which young people and communities face. Let's look a little bit at the labor force survey data. That's the next slide. In the last labor force survey data that we have available, which is the October quarter of the labor force survey, the unemployment rate is very low, 4.2%. And all of you who follow the news will know that this is the first time in the history of this country of the measurement of unemployment or labor force statistics, or the labor force, I would say, that we have such a low unemployment rate. And the difference between the unemployment rates of males and females, that difference has shrunken. So if you look at males, it's 3.1%, and for females, 5.4%. In going back to the October 2021 labor force data, however, because I didn't have the time to find the similar figures for the 2023. 2023 report is not yet out. It's just, you know, a few indicators that they provide data on. If you look at the 2021 report, about 47% of the employed labor force has no academic qualifications, no formal training. And the vast majority of them, 2/3 of them, are males. They have no academic qualifications and they have no formal training. And when I see some of the studies of gender-based violence, one of the indicators, there's some work done by a colleague in the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work. One of the significant contributors, or I would say factors associated with perpetrating gender-based violence, is just the lower level of education of the man, of the male, who is the perpetrator, usually. 47.5% are engaged in formal employment, and more, they are again more males. They are operating more in the service as service workers and shop and market sales workers, or they're employed in the wholesale and retail trades, repair of motor vehicle and motorcycles. So it's important to note the level of education of our employed labor force, and to understand some of the associations between that and some of the, you know, social instabilities that we are experiencing. I want to move on quickly now to, I'm very aware of time, so you'll tell me where I am in terms of time. Gender-based violence and intimate partner violence. I just want to take a few quotations from reports. I have 5 more minutes. Thank you. 2016, Rashida Manjoo. She says violence against women in the Caribbean is rooted in culture, gender socialization, stereotyping, and also in socioeconomic realities. Karen Watson-Williams, author of the Women's Health Report for Jamaica for the study was done in 2016, but it was published in 2018, noted that intimate partner violence affects more than 1 in every 4 women in Jamaica. Laurie Samuel, 2023, quoting UN Women, makes the point that domestic violence in the Caribbean is as normal as rice and peas. Wow. Official statistics show that nearly 40% of women across the Caribbean experience violence at the hands of their partners. UNFPA Caribbean Sub-Regional Office, gender-based violence is a problem across the Caribbean region. They cite recent studies conducted in Grenada, Guyana, Jamaica, Suriname, Trinidad, and Tobago. 27 to 40% of women reported to have experienced violence at the hands of their partners. They say that the prevalence surveys also confirm that the persistence of risks of violence that women face in the home and the community is rooted in gender inequality. Inequitable gender norms support male dominance in intimate partner relationships. So we can see that it is rampant in the Caribbean. And to quote, something I got from Real FM Grenada 2021, it can blight lives. Gender-based violence can blight lives. And it's not just the life of the victim, who more often than not is the woman, but also if there are children in the household, it affects them as well. Continuing, UNDP says 29% of women in Grenada have experienced physical and or sexual violence by an intimate partner, and 23% experience sexual violence by a non-intimate partner. Deborah Joseph and Adele Jones, they're writing out of UB Cave Hill 2023, say that patriarchal values together with childhood exposure to violence were found to reduce empathic capacity and contribute to the normalization of domestic violence. And they studied Grenada and Barbados. And they said about 3/4 of the participants described domestic violence as something they had witnessed or been exposed to on a regular basis from early childhood. And quotations are, where we're from, domestic violence is a normal thing. You see it every day and you just walk your way. Some participants suggested it was so common as to be unremarkable. It is just human nature to us. Imagine we say that, something like that. And Lilia Burunsiok, who is the World Bank's country representative for the countries of the Caribbean, said in Grenada, 1 in 5 women aged 15 to 64 believe that violence between a husband and wife is a private matter. So there's this culture of silence that is a challenge, a major challenge that we have to overcome. Continuing, so sexual harassment in the Caribbean is considered to be normalized behavior, shameful, rooted in the patriarchal culture which we still experience and are living through. Although, being chipped away, and we must give, acknowledge that significant gains have been made. People like Lynette Vassell, who have worked in the trenches from the 1970s, will tell you of some of these gains that we have made over time. The percentage of women experiencing sexual harassment over the last 12 months, that's what the surveys generally ask. Jamaica, 13.6%. Trinidad and Tobago, 13%. And then based on a 2021 study of sexual harassment in the workplace, you see the data. 47% experienced harassment. 70% knew someone who had experienced harassment. And 48% witnessed harassment at work. So I'm shifting quickly to unpaid care and domestic work now, in the household that is. Globally, women engage in a disproportionate amount of unpaid care and domestic work. I think I told you, washing, cooking, cleaning, looking after children, etc. And it reduces their ability to engage in paid work. The other thing is that our systems of national accounts for the Caribbean and many other countries do not measure directly the contribution of value of unpaid care and domestic work to gross domestic product. So we don't generally have a measure of it. However, in 2018, myself and a colleague, we got the Planning Institute to agree with us that we needed a special study on time use. And so my colleague and I did the work. We prepared the survey, the module, which we fielded through the 2018 Survey of Living Conditions. And we did all the training, etc. And on the basis of the data, Capri, with the economists, they were able to measure the contribution of unpaid care and domestic work to GDP in Grenada, in Jamaica. And they made the point that it is based on different approaches. There are about 3 approaches to the measurement of the contribution of unpaid care and domestic work to GDP. And they used all 3. And they saw that it could value anywhere between 15 and 45% of GDP. But in Jamaica, women spend 2 to 2.3 times more than men engaged in unpaid care and domestic work. In any one day, they spend about 261 minutes compared to men who spend 117 minutes. In Grenada, it's 243 minutes against men's 111 minutes. months. So if we move on to the following slide, I'll send the presentation to you. All I'm showing you there is the daily time, the average time allocations per day as a share of all activities for men and women. And in terms of paid work, about 21% of the daily activities for males is spent in paid work, compared with 13% for women. But when you look at unpaid care and domestic work, women spend 18%, whereas men spend 8%. So there is that corollary issue. I wouldn't bother with the multivariate analysis slide because I'm wrapping up now. I'm sure I have like a few seconds. So I'm ending now with a quotation really from Lilia Boruncio, who is the World Bank's country director for the Caribbean region, who in March last year said that 5 trends in gender inequality in the Caribbean are: 1, that women outperform men academically, but they struggle to transition from school to work. And they struggle to transition largely because of some of the, again, because of gender stereotyping and socialization. They go into particular professions which are lower earning, and they also have care responsibilities which take them out of the labor market for longer periods. And so they don't have that long investment in labor markets to be able to earn. Set to earn higher, at higher levels. Secondly, she says, despite rising employment rates, women still hold low-paying jobs. Third, while female entrepreneurship rates are comparatively high, women are usually micro-entrepreneurs and need more access to finance. 4, women in the Caribbean are often disproportionately affected by natural hazards. And 5th, women's political representation has significantly improved, but their agency remains limited. So when you hear of the ministers and the ministerial portfolios, you know the women generally get into the more care. So education and social protection sometimes, and gender and culture and those kinds of things. Hardly as, ministers of finance, etc. So I'm ending with this quotation from the director of projects at the Caribbean Development Bank, Therese Turnout-Jones. She used to be the resident representative for the IDB in Jamaica. She says, she gives us a collective mission and charge. We all have an important role to play, she says. We must be prepared to challenge our personal ideas on issues related to gender equality. This is the only way to fully support women and help them to reach their full potential. And that will entail tackling stereotypes and also ensuring that policy and legislation and enforcement, importantly, are upheld. We have to commit to re-socializing our societies and socially re-engineering our societies through, again, policy, legislation, enforcement, bringing all the stakeholders to the table. Also supporting effective parenting and family functioning. And I will add the importance of the role of fathers in families must be something which I would want to charge all of you to promote as you conduct your pastoral work, as you go into communities and you talk with people about men playing their role as fathers. It is very important. We need an architecture for the care economy, which is emerging, which we are seeing so important in the Caribbean. And of course, conflict prevention, management, and resolution. I end by saying that it is critical for us to articulate the kind of society we want, which is a more wholesome society with less of the current environmental incivilities. And this would mean relevant policy, programs, legislation, along with enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ricketts, for your very informative presentation. I will ask that we hold our questions until all of the presenters have presented, and then we will go into our question and answering section. So right now we'll invite our second presenter, Father Arthur.
So I feel very much the odd person out here. I am manifestly not from the Caribbean, and I'm not a woman. That's pretty obvious as well. And I'm not an expert on gender equality. I'm not an expert on gender norms. My biography perhaps missed out that I do have a great interest in Catholic social teaching, which is the Catholic Church's, Roman Catholic Church's attempt to apply the Christian gospel to political issues, political and economic issues. And that's really the reason I got invited today. So I'm going to say a few perhaps theoretical things rather than the really wonderfully practical, detailed things we heard from our previous speaker. So I hope our presentations will support each other and, provide. I hope I can provide some thoughts that will promote the things that the previous speaker was talking about. So I want to start with family life, and I hope that first of all, in talking about marriage, I avoid. There's a joke about a man a priest who preaches about marriage, and two old ladies in the congregation sitting at the back, as Catholics do, say to each other, "Sure, now he's a lovely man. I only wish I knew as little about marriage as he does." So I hope I avoid that. So the thing that couples coming to me for instruction for marriage are always surprised by is that I always start with the fact that our Catholic liturgy underlines very strongly that marriage is a partnership of equals. Now that's often a complete surprise to them, but that's actually part of the Roman Catholic rite of marriage, is that we tell the couple, the priest tells the couple that their marriage is a partnership of equals. And this is not an inessential part of the Catholic view. It's built into the fact that, of course, as Christians, we think that the relationship between husband and wife is a kind of image of the relationship between Christ and his church. And the dominant theology of that relationship, that second relationship, the relationship between Christ and his church, is to think of the love that Christ has for us and the love that we have for God and then for each other as a species of friendship. Now that might surprise you. But the idea, of course, in all friendship is only between equals. You cannot really be friends with someone if there is some inequality between you, or at least unless you are able to somehow set aside the inequality, you will never be friends. And this is why, for example, people shouldn't lend their friends money. If your friends need money, give it to them, don't lend it to them, because what you do is you create a natural inequality and you destroy the friendship in the process. It's not just about arguments about repayment. It's the very fact of being a creditor and a debtor creates a natural inequality. So if Christ and the church are related in something like the way friends are related, then husband and wife are related fundamentally, first of all, in something like the way that friends are related, and therefore must be equals of each other. Now, that's not to say that one or the other might not take the lead in different situations. That's a different thing. There might be situations in which it is right that one or the other takes the lead. And some more conservative Catholics like to think that men are naturally in charge of the relationship. I think that is false and foolish. But I mean, yeah, just foolish. Anybody who sees how married relationships work know that that's not how it works. Actually, it's just not how it works. But the point is, the love of Christ for his church, the love that the husband is meant to have for his wife, is a self-sacrificial love, right? A self-giving love that's not about domination and lording it over the other. So even if we think of Christ as the head of the church and the man as the head of the family, so I think that's wrong-headed, even said like that. But even if you are going to go for that, it is somewhat undermined, turned over by this idea that Christ came among us to serve, not to be served. So, like our previous speaker, I am shocked and appalled by the situation of gender violence and the terrible situation of families where children are growing up with no fathers, with no male figure in the family at all. I think that is an appalling situation, and I think it actually creates many of the societal ills that we see in Caribbean life. My experience is mainly of Jamaica and Grenada, but I imagine these things are, I mean, by the sounds of all of those statistics, it sounds like it's really very broadly true in general. And that's because actually families provide, different members of the family provide different things. That men and women ought to be equal and friends of each other, that they will find themselves one taking the lead in one situation, the other taking the lead in another, doesn't mean that they don't bring particular things to family life. And I think that children who grow up in a family where they lack a good male example, for example, just to take one example, I think those children suffer. And I think that society as a whole suffers. And I think one of the difficulties of the society that we live in and the way in which our society thinks about sexual relationships is that it is fundamentally unequal. And that is a deep, deep problem. I mean, fundamentally, when I say fundamentally unequal, I mean at the very root of the way those relationships work. So I had the striking experience of going into the head teacher's office at St. George's, and he was dressing down 3 young men who now had children, now had fathered children. And good for him that he was talking to them and trying to encourage them to take responsibility in the lives of their children. But of course, if you're a 16-year-old boy, 16-year-olds are just boys, it's not terribly likely, is it? But in the same week, I was in the office of the head teacher of Holy Childhood High School, speaking to a young girl who had become pregnant. Well, her academic career, at least for now, was over. She had to leave school. She couldn't have the child and stay in school. The difference between being dressed down and sent away is dramatic. And in terms of the outcomes for that woman, that young woman, it's dramatic. At Aquinas, we live right next door to Mary's Child. And I know that the inhabitants, the people who stay at Mary's Child, for those of you who don't know, it's an organization that allows young women who don't have support to have a space to have their children in a safe environment and then raise them, at least for a time, in a safe environment that the organization can't accommodate people forever, but for a short while, mothers can raise their newborns in a safe environment and in a helpful environment. But the tragic thing of that institution is that nearly all the women, I mean, the statistics here were horrific enough. 30%, sort of 25% people in workplaces have had experience of sexual harassment, even larger percentage had some experience of sexual violence against them in some way. Nearly all the inhabitants of Mary's Child have been raped or otherwise pressured into the pregnancies that they have. So to that is a deep wound in that perfect picture. I mean, the perfect picture that I was painting a moment ago of two equals marrying and setting up a family together for the purpose of loving each other and supporting each other, but also, of course, of raising children. That picture just isn't the reality for the vast majority of Jamaicans, and we have that demonstrated perfectly by all of those wonderful statistics. And all of this is a deep injustice, because at the core of Catholic social teaching, Roman Catholic social teaching, is the dignity of the human person, founded on our being made in the image of God. All of us created in the image of God, and therefore fundamentally made for equality and made for dignity. And that dignity is enhanced, that equality is enhanced by our involvement in the Christian church. You all know, I'm sure, the part in the passage in Galatians 3 where Paul is talking about the equality that comes with baptism in Christ. There is neither male nor female, and so on. So our baptism doesn't undermine that fundamental equality, but affirms it and even raises it into a new height. And until we have a society that creates a culture where women and men can enter freely into relationships where they relate to each other as equals, and can create a culture then for the microculture for the raising of children, until we do that, there is a fundamental inequality in our society. Now, what do we do to remedy it? I'm not a politician. I thought some of the recommendations at the end of the last presentation were absolutely excellent. But I want to add one important thing. It's become very common at the moment to talk about equality and equity. So equality is, equality before the law, everybody gets treated equally. But there are many situations in which equity requires us to support particular groups in particular ways. And one of the interesting bits of research that I came across is that economists have shown that supporting women in families is dramatically better than supporting men. So the Bangladeshi economist Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2006, primarily targeted his special program of microloans, microfinancing to women, because the research shows that if you increase the living standards of men, they spend the money on themselves by and large. If you increase the living standards of women, they spend the money on their families. And so it's dramatically better to support women in the economy than it is to support men. And that's not to say that men don't in many situations need support. I think one of the things about gender norms, and I think this is something I experienced growing up, and I think it's even stronger here, is that it can be very lonely if you don't inhabit the norms that your society maps out for you. It can be a very lonely experience. You can feel very much an outsider. And so it's very important for us to support men as well, but I think in another way. And I think combating that culture of silence that has already been talked about, silence surrounding the sexual violence against men, but also the culture of ridicule of men who take on more of the burden of care, who are more interested in the caring professions. I think Jamaica and the Caribbean in general, certainly Jamaica and Grenada, people can be ridiculed for going into caring professions as men. And I think that is a great problem. And I think we actually need many more men in the teaching and nursing and other caring professions. I think that would be a very powerful thing for our society. So I think we need support for women in families, and especially women in families where there is no male support. We need financial support. We need other kinds of social support. But we also need, I love the idea of re-envisioning, rethinking of our social norms that would change our society, because we desperately need it. And really those changes don't come. The changes in the gender pay gap, for example, in the number of men in caring professions, in the number of men taking their share, their just share in the non-paid caring at home, those things don't happen until more fundamental changes happen in how we see ourselves as a society, how we see our roles as men and women. And so I really want to finish off with just 1 minute, I guess, thinking about gender norms, because we haven't really said too much. We said some things, but not a huge amount. Gender norms, of course, there are some parts of those gender norms that are relatively stable across cultures, but lots of them vary quite a bit. And actually, we mustn't think that those things are somehow set in our human nature, right? That it is for women to do the cooking, that it is for women to, do various other things. Those are stronger, I think, here than they would be in the UK, for example. I was quite shocked with American students coming over to be taught in Oxford, that they expected what many Caribbean people would expect, that the women would cook and that the men would eat. But those things are not set in our human natures. They are just part of the way in which our society is presently constructed. And if they are part of the way in which the society is presently constructed, we can construct society in different ways. And we perhaps, well, not just perhaps, we should, until men take their share of those unpaid caring roles, society for the situation for women will inevitably be disadvantageous. And as I said, we heard girls do better at school, but they do worse in the workplace. That makes literally no sense. And that's due to these gender, or must be due to these gender expectations that are different between men and women in those ways. I think those are the important issues to
We thank Father Andre for an informative presentation. Once again, please make note of your questions and we will have a section afterwards. We invite our final presentation, the last, by no means least, to come and present to us.
Warm greetings to everyone, and thank you for inviting me. And I thank my panelists for laying the groundwork very nicely for me to continue in this conversation. I'm not one who is going to wait until you have questions to ask. I'm going to ask you questions. And happily, you're at tables so you can, confer with each other around when the time comes. But I want to start by saying that this morning when I was doing my devotion, it came to me that it fitted very well into the aspect of the discussions that we're about. And if somebody would read Romans 6, 12 and 13 quickly, I'd be very appreciative. I know you have your you should know it out of your head. Nobody has no? Romans 6, 12 and 13.
Therefore, let sin reign in your mortal body, so that you obey its evil desires. Do not offer any part of yourself to sin as an instrument of wickedness, but rather offer yourselves to God as those who have been bought from death to life, and offer every part of yourself to him as an instrument of righteousness.
Thank you. That's the part that I wanted to come out. The fact that we all here share that common context. You are students, theological students, and we as panelists who are Christians, we are bound in this commitment to offer ourselves as instruments of righteousness. That is very important because being instruments mean that we are not going to be passively talking about heaven pie in the sky and people must line up for their gifts in heaven. But we recognize that there is a struggle that we have to engage here and now, which is why your course is so well named, Christian Social Ethics. It's an ethics that demands action, demands consciousness, because it's saying, give yourself as an instrument to promote righteousness and righteous living. We can denote and explore righteousness in so many different ways. But it seems to me that one expectation, and I'm a lover of Isaac, is that the question of justice is fundamental. I think both our panelists spoke about this. Justice, promoting justice, just social relations, just society is a very important element of the mandate that we have to transform our reality. And when we come to talk about social gender norms or biased gender norms, which we have touched on, that is such a part of the reality that we all face and that has been laid out very well to us, that as men and women, we cannot divorce ourselves from that. And I know these conversations sometimes make men very defensive because they feel that society is saying that they are the ones who are the perpetrators of violence in the main, and they are. And society does not necessarily understand or provide an understanding about why all men are the way they are. What has cultivated this understanding of masculinity that we so proudly walk in as men. And society does not understand how this definition of masculinity really makes a lot of men have two positions. You feel good and in charge, that you are the beneficiary of privilege which patriarchy gives to you. But at the same time, you feel insecure, many men, about acting in the roles that society says you are to act. That you must be the leader, that you must have answers to every question, that you must control. Because sometimes you don't feel that you need to control. You want to relax. You don't feel that you have to have many women. Well, of course, as ministers in training, I'm just raising this as an example. You don't feel that you need to have many women to show that your sexual prowess. You don't feel that you have to drink and, in order to show that you're in charge. All the indications from a lot of what patriarchy puts on men, a lot of it is no good for them because it divorces them from their humanity by telling them that this is what a man is. Who is a man? If you go out and ask boys and girls in Jamaica, what does being a man mean? You wouldn't be surprised that a lot of the answers support the views and the values that we have been exposing as denoting gender social norms. So if men are to embrace the notion of being instruments of righteousness, they have to, in my view, think through how this understanding of what it means a man disadvantages them, even as it advantages them. And they have to be prepared to let go of the advantages because they know that that undermines their humanity in many aspects. The next thing that I wanted to raise with you is what are these gender social norms that you experience, that you know, that you see? And just if the people at the table just confer and then just tell us one, we can see, what we mean. When we say biased gender norms that we experience and see, what are some of those? Many examples were given, but what are the ideas about what it means to be a woman or a man? Or what are some of the ideas about how women's lives must be operated that you will hear in society? I'll give you some, yes, sir. Right. Next, that's another one. Nice one.
And that prevent to wash clean and make the man happy.
Right. Yes. Any others? At the back? Yes.
Charmaine Bailey. Recently I was elected to a board and 8 of us are on the board, and the only female. So I pointed out to them at the outset, please note, I am not going to be your secretary. Because there is this notion that a woman, a female, must be the secretary. So they got that from
The start.
the start.
Good for you. Any other? Yes.
Often heard that men are the defenders of protectors.
Men are the defenders and protectors. You know, when my husband was alive and we heard any noise in the night, I really don't expect him to go out alone. So even if I go and, stand behind him, I couldn't, this whole business of men as the protector, but it's such a burden to men, don't you think? Because sometimes you really don't feel that brave either, not you? I mean, it's such a burden, yes. Next one.
Coming from a rural community, one of the things that we heard was that the women should go to, or the girls should go to school, but the boys should remain to help with the market load, going to the bush, catching the water and so on, but the females went to get an education.
Yes.
The male child is allowed to roam, to be out and about in the community. But the girl child needs to stay inside. That was my experience. I had a view from the veranda. My brother was out and about, but I had to stay.
Very good. Yes, thank you for that. But tie the bull and let the tie the hand use the bull. Yes.
Men are allowed to have they can allow have as many women amorous relationships as they can for one. Once a woman does that, then she's a whore.
Absolutely. Anybody else wants to wrap it up? Yes. Yeah.
Some women are faced with the choice of forfeiting pregnancies in order to maintain and advance their careers. I think it was mentioned earlier. I'm just underscoring it.
In other words, you take a choice not to have a home and family. Take a chance, right? Because it's so hard to do both. Now, so these ideas have the effect of limiting and constraining the choices of women, right? Wouldn't you say? Right, they have that effect. They also have the influence, the consequence of giving men authority over women at the individual level, at the family level, in the community, and you see it also at the national level, societal level, because one that is very pervasive is that leadership is the domain of men. Also, in general, don't you find that women can do a lot of the help in the political process, go on canvas, fundraising, and so forth. But when it comes to who will go forward as a representative, it's the man. And there are lots of other elements that buttress that view. We say it's important for us to not only look at these norms, but you as persons who are preparing to take on that role as instruments of righteousness, instruments to transform our reality. Look at ourselves very dispassionately to see what in us, where in us, if in us, reside any of those prejudices and discrimination against women. Because it can be in our personal relationship, how we relate to our girlfriend or wife or husband or whatever. It can work. It can be present in that zone. And if we don't examine it in that zone, it is going to be very difficult to examine it in the wider social context. Now, reference was made to patriarchy as the root of these ideas. And as you know, patriarchy, I thought I would bring you a quote that I have about patriarchy. I think I've left it on the table. It's a quote from Bell Hooks, who describes that how patriarchy is rooted in the idea of the domination of men over women. It's rooted in the idea that men must have, that women are really inferior. And you see it in the Bible, of course, a lot. And I wonder how people relate to scriptures and what is being taught in the seminary about these issues. I also this week read Leviticus, verse 8, chapter verse 8, 1 to 8, where it was talking about, yes, chapter 12, 1 to 8, where it was describing the purification rites if you have a boy child or a girl child. Have you ever read that? Revisit it, please. And when you read that, you can see how that second-class citizen status is in the word that persons say we must uncritically live by. And therefore, we have to ask ourselves, when we look at the framework that guides our faith, are we going to be uncritical about that? Or are we going to see for what it is, a patriarchal norm, culture that has been created and is embedded? I mean, Abraham is the arch patriarch, and all of you know more than that about that than I do. And imported in a context and in a society where these values came on us as descendants of enslaved Africans who were brought here against our will and made to work for nothing and denigrated. Because you see, we can't forget that history. If we want to be instruments of righteousness, we cannot, in our time and in our culture and in our place, not see how these layers of oppression came on us. That tells us that as Black people, we don't have no use. Or if you cut issues of color and class and race that are overlaid in our context on who we are as a people. We know, for example, that the church was very much invested in the slave trade and in slave holding in Jamaica. As a matter of fact, on Sunday, there's a service at our church at Webster Memorial United, and I'd like to invite you all to come, where there's going to be a discussion of this. And I think an apology, Karen, is going to be given by a section of the churches from England around the whole issue of slavery and reparation. Because you see, we can't just skip over these things. We can't just skip over these things and look at the kind of society that we have and say, the man them bad, they're out of order, slackness. But the fact is that brutality and violence was an instrument of life on the plantation. We have come up in a very violent culture where lynching and all manner of evil was rained upon the majority of our people. Therefore, we have to recognize that we have to take these issues into account in moving forward. And therefore, one of the things that I wanted to raise with us is how are we going to step out of this frame? What can we do, for example, in terms of raising our children and our families, in order to reverse and transform, as we have been hearing and discussing? And I'd like to hear in your response what you think about the whole matter of ending corporal punishment of children. Do you think that we are ready as a society to say that we and the church as a major organ and entity, cultural and religious framework, do you think that as church we should be having a campaign among ourselves, first of all, and more broadly, to stop the beating of children, stop the corporal punishment of children? How would that help? Would that help to address the whole issue of violence in our society, violence against women and girls, violence that men show to each other in terms of what we see, the gang issues? So I come to you not as one as having answers, but as one more asking us to probe questions, especially to probe that for us all to be liberated and to build the kind of transformation that we want, our men have to be prepared to see how patriarchy damages them, even as it privileges them in society. And therefore, if we want that change, we have to put a stop and we have to take a stand for the total transformation of men and women, boys and girls. Thank you very much.
Yet another thought-provoking presentation. So we thank you for your presentation. And at this time, we want to thank all of our panelists for their presentation. This is a time I know we have all been waiting for, where we get to ask our questions. And so we'll ask that you introduce yourself, just stating your name, and then you will pose your questions to the panelists. So the floor is now open.
Yes, Father Peter. Yes, I'm Roger Copeland, one of your students. Yes. So you mentioned about the girls and women that have given birth and the children end up at Mary's child. But what is it that is causing our males to be preying on our females like this, impregnating them?
I think that's I think that's a very hard question to answer, and maybe sociology is better giving us some insights into these things. I do think that culture of violence that I think all three of us have talked about in different ways, being endemic, then combines with other patterns like patriarchy. You know, I think one of the moments that was a turning moment for me, it happened to me when I was about 19. I loved one of my professors at Cambridge. I thought he was wonderful. And I was going on and on to one of my female friends about him. And she went silent. And I knew something was wrong. And I said to her, you know, you don't have that experience. She just said, he's very handsy, which in English means you know, he puts his hands on people. He's very handsy. And my whole view of that man changed in a moment. And I think we men don't realize, I think, how much our women friends and colleagues suffer from these things. But I also think we sometimes see them happen and we let them go. You know, that quote that domestic violence is a private thing. When COVID happened and we had the lockdown, living up at Aquinas as we were then, the neighbors on the other side, not the Mary's Child neighbors, but the other neighbors, it just got louder and more and more obviously violent. And I was saying to people, we should do something about this. This is terrible. We need to phone somebody. We need to, you know, we need something done about this. No, Father. Leave it alone. It's not for us to step in. And I think too often, A, we don't allow ourselves to see what's going on. B, even when we do see what's going on, you know, it's private, we shouldn't really do anything. So I think we need, you know, why does it happen? I think it's a combination of a generally violent society for all of the reasons that we talked about already, with that patriarchal, male-dominated, certainly, situation. But then it's exacerbated by the fact we just don't talk about it. We don't think about it properly. We don't as men, we should be calling out these things when we see them, and we should be stopping them happening when we hear about them, see them. But we don't do that, and shame on us.
Thank you. I think, you know, Father is absolutely correct. I wanted to add, and I sort of said to each other, that women are seen as property. We are not owners of ourselves. You know, that's the way I tend to put it, you know, quite often. Other people police women's bodies, but women. And so this is something that has the state polices it, men police women's bodies, and the reverse is not true. Men's bodies are not, men are not policed by state or others as women, because men are not seen as property, but women are unfortunately seen as property.
I remember in my early years, I challenged my mother once, and I remember that she said that she is to care, love, provide for me, give me shelter and education until tertiary. She said the government said secondary, but I'll go to tertiary because I love it. After that, I let it go. It was about the domestic chores in the house and things, unpaid work, as you said. And I said to myself, in the 18 years where you say I'm allowed to make a decision and be on my own, those are fundamental years where you give me, you know, those morals, those values, those guidance, and I always stand by for the whole time. So I don't understand a woman teach young women, girls, to do the same things they don't want to. And that is the unpaid. Women do it large, and girls do it in the home with boys. When there's a boy, the boy gets a truck. He gets, I don't know, something else. He gets a pot, a play pot or something. And we just keep building up from there, and it doesn't change. So my question is, why don't we take a different educational route? Why do we stick to the same thing and promote this side and then want to change it when it affects us or later in the years?
I would say two things. One, it does change. Things do change over time. I remember the time when women could not wear pants, remember? I remember the idea that a whistling woman and a crowing hen is an abomination unto the Lord. There was a time when women could not enter certain professions. Police, lawyer. There was a time when women had to give up their jobs if they got pregnant, lost their job in the civil service, lose your job. So over time, there have been changes in many aspects, but the fundamental cultural values have not sufficiently shifted, not among women and not among men, because of the influence of our institutions. The churches, for example, you will forgive me for the truth. The churches, for example, are still ambivalent about violence against women. That is something that we must not speak about or pray about it, if anything. And the whole business that even leaders in the church are involved in this is something that is hush hush. The government, although it has signed many documents and international conventions like the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, still does not have a strong framework of policies or laws or finance that pushes that. And what is more, the advocacy that we used to have among women and our organizations about these things has fallen, because nowadays if you talk about those things, people are even ambivalent as to whether they must call themselves feminists, because they're, so it is, some changes are taking place, but the superstructure of ideas and institutions and the consciousness raising that we used to have are things of the past, because people are more in their individual spaces trying to do well as an entrepreneur and whatever. You notice that you don't hear a lot of the women's movement being active and speaking out about things. And in the churches, we continue to have too much silence. I'm happy to say that the United Church is revisiting its policy on gender that it drafted some years ago. I hope it will go someplace. But these are the areas that we need to have the change in, and the change is in with us. So, you're in a good place.
I do agree that we're not hearing as much from the women's movement, but I'm more concerned about not hearing from the men. Because we seem to think when these things happen, that it's the women who must speak out against some kind of injustice against women. But are they not a concern to men as well? That it might very well be the problem that it's just women who are speaking about it. I think we need some more vocal men who will step up and say that it's not right.
And I accept, I think that a number of organizations and associations in which influential men sit could be more vocal. But I think, like Lynette's answer to your question earlier, things are also changing. There is, for example, program on fathers that I hear on one of the stations. Men talking for themselves, because they say a lot of the focus comes from women. I hear, people like, I think Minister Floyd Green and others are on that program. I know there is Fathers Incorporated, and they do some work and so on. So some things, even some of the fathers and men's organizations in the churches are also through mentorship programs are trying to make some change in communities, etc. But I will agree with you, with Lynette, that the superstructure, is slow to change. And men who sit in influential positions, I'm totally agreed with you, their voices could be heard more, forcefully and regularly about some of these issues. Agreed.
I would add as well that men benefit from the situation as it is, The brother said it a while ago, that society accepts that a man can have more than one woman, normalize it. The gender wage gap, the men get more money. Can you imagine? I always have this image, even the church. The man and the woman go to church, right? And they both come home. And she take off the hat and go in the kitchen. And he takes the newspapers and sits down. In other words, men benefit from the existing situation to a large extent, although it undermines their personhood. And until men come as allies to recognize that as instruments of righteousness, we have to stand up. I don't think we're going to see it. In other words, the church has to be a space that takes a leadership role in this thing because of the mandate that the church has.
But it also, men, I think you made the point, Father, that the men who, I think Lynette, you might have made it too, who run against that grain are ridiculed. Yes? And the definition, it goes back now, I suppose, the definition of masculinity. There is this issue of toxic masculinity. And we have quite a bit of that manifested in our societies. And so men who run against that grain, who have one woman and will help their wife with the cooking after they come from church and so on, they themselves feel afraid to say that loudly in spaces where they are, because you know what we say about such men. Yes, so even the men have to look at how unkind they are to their own brothers in the things that they say about them, One burner. Like a stove that has one burner. Yes.
Sorry, I've never known.
While you might be looking, I just wanted to say something to Father who spoke of the same culture of ridicule, for men who take on the burden of care. And I think you gave the example of teaching and so on. In some of these care professions, men are put on what is known as a glass escalator to jettison them to the top. So they become principals of schools, they become in charge. If they are a nurse, they don't stay as a nurse, they have to be at the head quick time. And that's referred to as the glass escalator, once they're in care professions. Years ago, I used to teach a course, Caribbean Social Issues, which a lot of students from the Faculty of Humanities and Education took. And I would, in introducing, asking them to introduce themselves and ask, well, what are you studying? And invariably, men were studying leadership and administration, and the women were studying managing learning difficulties, literacy studies, and I think it was early child. Yes? So when they are studying those, so I used to tell each cohort, I said, well, don't complain, you know. When you can't become the principal, you see what your brothers are doing, you see what they're not doing learning, managing learning difficulties and so on. They are setting themselves up to be the leaders, you know, and the managers of the schools, etc.
I agree with you, of course, but I also think that, you know, that's another way in which it's destructive for men, because it actually removes a possibility. I mean, some people want to be in management. I personally absolutely never wanted that. But actually, some people are much better being the people. The people in the classroom. You know, some men, you know, men shortchange themselves. They end up as managers, not doing what they actually love, which is teaching or being a nurse. You know, and I feel that these gender norms, I mean, I agree, because of the patriarchy, because of the power structures involved, they work particularly against women. But they also restrict the options for men in all kinds of odd ways. And I think you know, it's sad that we end up in a society where people are destroying themselves. And yes, they might think they're getting the better out of it. They're getting to sit and read their newspaper while their wife cooks the dinner. But actually, inequality is always bad for everybody. Always. And always destroys proper human relationships.
Question to the panelists. In the Caribbean, there has been a significant shift in recent years, with women breaking historical gender norms, challenging misogyny, and reshaping family dynamics. Women in the Caribbean are increasingly asserting their rights, voices, and agency in various spheres of life, including politics, business, academia, and activism. Do you think that this is somewhat reversing the misogynistic effort, or instead creating a feminist world?
I don't agree that it's creating a feminist world. I think it is doing some reversing of misogyny. And I think it's important. As you know, Father said, this is a marriage, and I'm taking it now outside of the marriage, you know, of equals. It's equal. So both men and women must be able to pursue whatever their potentials may, you know, allow. Of course, we put certain checks and balances on ourselves. So, you know, every time I think of myself, so yes, I am Dean of Faculty of Social Science. Big faculty, the largest faculty. And I keep saying to myself, if my children were 10, 15 years younger, would I have done this? And I don't think so. I don't think I would have allowed myself to. And it's not because I would not have had my husband's support, because I want to think that I am in a marriage of equals. My husband, I think, is quite good in that area. But also my own socialization as a woman to ensure that I am present for my children. You know, I wasn't dean, but I was head of department before, and I had other responsibilities. My children used to be the last to be picked up from school. It used to hurt me. You know, I used to say, look at me. I'm always hustling from some place somewhere. Everybody has gone home, and these children are, you know, the last to be picked up. Because the division was that I worked closer, and my husband was much further and, you know, away from where the children were and so on. So I would say that, in answer to your question, we're not creating any feminist world. Yes, we are trying to get a just world where men and women are seen as equal. We are equal partners trying to build a sustainable society. I think that's, and we are asking to be allowed to come to the table both of us, men, to come to the table where women generally sit, and women to come to the table where men generally sit. That's essentially what we are asking for. Not to lord it on anybody, but to be allowed to be seen and to be heard as an equal partner.
Well, I agree with what Heather said, but I would say I wish we were trying to create a feminist world. Because as Bell Hooks says, feminism is for everybody. What feminism, and feminism has been so maligned as a part of the backlash since the 90s. Forever since, they say, oh, feminists want to, what? Rule our men, all kinds of nonsense. Burn bra, you know, in the 60s it used to be that. But feminism is speaking about seeing and understanding injustice and discrimination and wanting to overturn it in a way that embraces the humanity of both women and men. So it is just nowadays that you find, surprisingly, you find a lot of young people that say, I'm not feminist. I'm feminist. I'm hoping and praying that the day will come when we and our brothers can stand up together and build the kind of world that enhances our partnerships and our potentials as men and women. Maybe we'll change the name of the word that time, but for now, that is the frame that I would like.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the floor?
Thank you, I'm Karen Durant Maxine. So not a question, but a comment. So I like the fact that you stressed about, Dr. Ricketts, about the men and the women as equal partners. Well, you know, all of you would have brought it up. So, because sometimes I think the way it is approached, and the way we approach things have a lot to do. So sometimes it seems as though we are moving from one extreme to the next. And Dr. Ricketts, you spoke in your presentation about that the men, because they are not, the women are excelling. And not only about the work, but a lot of the cause of domestic violence is because of the men being the less educated one. And we know it is associated a lot with the societal norms and so on. And so there is that need for something which I don't think enough is being done of, because we have, for me personally, to get liberation, you have to empower liberator, oppressor and oppressed. And so sometimes we are not getting the right balance. And so it is not helping the situation, because what is happening is that the men are pushing back, that you are trying to push us out and so on. Because there needs to be, so I think that is definitely something that is needed, the balance of the empowerment. The men have to be empowered as well, because they're not empowered, why they promote this violence and so on against women.
And what you have said, Reverend Maxwell, is what you have said makes the point that men are not a homogeneous group, neither are women. There are lots of men who need to be empowered. You know, if you think of inner city men, men from rural areas, low-income men who need to be empowered. Some of them, are, in other words, engaging in activities that are disempowering themselves. And so men who are empowered also need to, stretch forth their hands to help their brothers. Yep.
I think we need to explore this word empower, because we use it very, I agree with you that both men and women need to have the opportunities to enable us to empower ourselves. Because empowerment is a process and a state where I take I see the opportunity and I take the responsibility to change and to take opportunities. Because if the man who does not have who is barely literate, he has to make the choice to enter the class, even though people are going to ridicule him or whatever. And what is more, the state, the government needs to agree with the Honorable what is happening. We need to launch a national adult education program with incentives and with positive reinforcement and so on and so forth. Because both men and women need to walk into that space. But women, I do not think, how women can help also is to change the gender dynamics in the household to make the boy as well as the girl take responsibility for themselves and to do the chores. You know what I'm saying? But it's not for us to say we are going to do something for somebody, but to create the opportunities where we can do for us.
Yeah, and the situation about in the home, that can be done because I grew up in a home that we did not have boy and girl work. It was age appropriate. So my older brother, for example, my mother was killed for part of the time of my childhood, 20. And so it had to do, and my elder sister was, with my father was working out of town. And the eldest at home was my brother before me, and he used to iron our clothes, the younger ones, you know, so that is what I grew up with. I mean, as I get older, I said, you know, I'm getting older, I will start to learn to iron, and I took on that for the younger ones. But we had age appropriate work. So if you are the boy and you're older, you had to take on more than the sisters who were young and so on. So that can be done. And so I think it is, you know, as those of us now can make that change.
I just thought I'd say that is really how my own view on these matters began to be formed, because I grew up in a family where my father was, I think, good for his generation, relatively willing to take his turn with the unpaid care work in the house. He certainly took his turn looking after us. He took his turn. He tried to take his turn with cooking, but he'd been brought up in a family where that was just a disaster. And his mother did all the cooking, and she never let him in. She wouldn't have let him to the kitchen. My mother had 5 sons, no daughters. She was determined that we would not grow up as incapable as my father. So we learned from when we were small to cook and clean and iron, and you know, we had to do those things. And I think that was the beginning of something in me. I think the other moments when I sort of realized a bit more what was going on. But I think it does begin with families and people making those simple changes, not saying, well, the son can do these things and the daughter can do these things. That isn't, you know, we aren't going to change things if that keeps happening. We've all got to be willing to take on all the things that we do in our families.
You know, one slide which I did not share was some information on a study which we did in 2004. It hasn't been repeated on parenting in Jamaica. So this year is 20 years old this year. And it showed a large percentage of parents reporting that they felt trapped and controlled by the parenting responsibility. So the assumption, that for me was a very, I would say, surprising find, because you sort of assume that mothers are enjoying parenting, but many of them are feeling trapped and controlled by the responsibility and also unable to cope. Now, it was as much as 32% of mothers said that they felt trapped and controlled. And that was compared to 18% of fathers. Yeah? Unable to cope, 56% said they were unable to cope, often or always. 42% of males. And in terms of stress levels, 58% of mothers were moderately or highly stressed, compared with 39% of fathers. So because of these separations in the house, the division of labor, etc., yeah, a lot of women who are mothers feel very stressed, unable to cope, and trapped and controlled by responsibility. And if you add on top of that, mothers who work, and many women in the Caribbean work or are engaged in some kind of income or activity, and these days a lot more are trying to study. When you put that triple burden, when you put that forward, you understand the kinds of feelings that these women would have. A lot of pressure.
Good night, everyone. So I would just like to just to add what Dr. Ricketts would have stated earlier about the whole task masculinity. And of course, men empowerment. We see all the time, every year on International Women's Day, we have different conferences about women empowerment, about men. When I go, I have my own charitable organization. And my aim is to give back to many marginalized communities. And part of what I do is mentorship. And we mentorship a lot of young people, especially I'm trying to see if I can get more young men involved. And when I go into the different inner city communities and see that these youths are at risk, when I check out this percentage, most of them don't have a father. Or if they have a father, the father and them cannot get along. It's really, really sad. And to see the activities that they are participating to empower them, gambling, smoking, stealing, it's just, I think that something needs to be done. And of course, I agree where the government needs to have some adult classes, because the thing is, most of these young men that are at risk, they are talented. I think that every one of them is destined for greatness. They just need a proper guidance. And of course, I tell a lot of single mothers this all the time. If you really want the best for your child, especially for your son, if it's you want to raise your son, seek, first number one, seek God. Number two, seek the right mentorship. Have mentors around them, male figures, right? And when you have these type of male mentors around them, they're not going to just give them yes all the time. You need men in their life to hold them accountable from their small growing up so that they can be better men. So when they have their wives and then their children, we're building some level of generational, not money wealth, but you know, it's where I'm coming from, some level of positivity for today's society. Because I remember sometime this week I saw somebody younger than me. I was 23 years old and I saw a young man younger than me. His ears were pierced 2 times, and when I looked in his ears, his screwdrivers are seen in ears. Screwdrivers that you would drill into a wall, and he has this big knife walking around, and I'm like, no man, this is crazy. And I went and I spoke with him. Sir, I don't have a father. So I think we need to have more men empowerment sessions. A lot of companies can support other conferences, women conferences, and I'm not saying nothing is not really wrong with women conferences, but we need to see the issue at hand and get it rectified. Thanks.
Good night, everyone. So I agree with what you really saying from Eden about one thing. So I grew up in a family. I have a younger brother, but my parents does everything equally. So in fact, most Sundays, to be honest, I find that right? A lot of persons say, what? Can't believe it. But most of the time I find it's because he loves it, but they cook according to what they grow up with. So certain things my mom is good at, certain things my father is good at. So they deal with that, right? Same thing with bills. Certain things my mom pays for, certain things my father pays for. Equal. So that's how I grew up, right? And when I was younger, but the only thing I would say that they were really share is like the cleaning, like cleaning up my kids are washing clothes. I think they were traditional where my mom did. But at the same time, she taught us, so as such it is that's for also kids. Like I guess most families are like where the kids and the mom help clean the house, right? So that's how I grew up, and I think together, I think that's how I would be also. They share everything with us. So, so I think it should be something like that. But I actually respect it because there is so much I like. I think everything should just be shared equally when it comes down to situations like that, especially if you're married.
You see how joyful you are?
Yeah. And also how important the family is and atmosphere is. Yes.
Honestly,
Because if your father was beating your mother, it was completely different. It wouldn't be something like this today.
True. And
So,
yes, and because of that,
they go with so critical.
yes, so, yes, in a way, I can bring a lot of heart. That's because of that, I heard of this, hear their opinions, share. I think the more you realize that it's really important because a lot of persons also tries it to, as well, I think I've seen a lot of persons have relations with people. But when I think one person just saying do this, do that because you're female, I don't think that it pushes a lot. And I think in today's society, we realize that every girl wants to be their own boss. And I think it's because of that situation, home and trying to go home, and that a lot of females now want to do everything by themselves, right? So when they grow up now, that's why a lot of them try to do it in school because they have these songs and everything saying push women that, oh, I want to be a boss, baby, this and that. And I think those are the situations why a lot of persons, a lot of even some mothers tell their daughter, try not to depend on you because of
Good evening, everyone. One of the things I wanted is the subtle ways in which we are being indoctrinated. And so we talk about the gender norms, but you don't have anybody necessarily saying to you to the go wash, cook, and clean in your face these days. Instead, we have found very subtle ways of telling people this is your role. We found, I think, as well for our young men, very creative ways of teaching them what is a cultural norm. So you go to cut your hair at the barber and you hear a conversation and you're listening, but it's man talking. And in the man talk, you are hearing, because whether you realize it or not, that conversation is for you. They are telling you how you should be living as a man. And you're now in the man's world, because only real man come about. And you're hearing there, whatever it is that they are promoting. Now, in some instances, it's very positive, but we know the likelihood of that is not very high. So a lot of what we are talking about, when we are alone reading or we are with a group like this, we are hearing one message. But when we go out into the community, there are so many other sources of the other message. And the question for us is, can we become aware of who is speaking, what is their agenda, and what are they saying to us, and how are we responding to what they are saying? Or else all that good that we say here, and even the good that we have experienced for ourselves. Because there are many families that will say, but I grew up, my son, he saw his father cooking on a Sunday. Why did he grow up like this? And you might not realize that you are being eroded very gradually as you're being channeled into a certain kind of behavior. And what we are seeing as well is that behavior leads to social success. On the other hand, because I wrote it down even from my women or educated women, sometimes it seems as if we're going backwards instead of forwards. So a woman will be educated with a PhD or whatever major terminal degree, but then still insist that she must go home and wash, cook, and clean because the community has said you have to secure your man, house, and children in order to achieve social success. So it doesn't matter how much educational or professional success that woman has. She's not viewed as successful by the community until she has accomplished these goals that are set by the community. And the same is true for the men. If you don't have the 2 women and the 5.6 children with 7 different women, then he's not a social success. So, I end though on a more positive note. When I was a child growing up in the 1980s, a man would slap his wife, girlfriend, on the public street, and everybody would walk past. No, she do something to deserve it. That's a sentiment, and afterwards you would hear the community come down on the woman and say to her, "Oh, what you do make tongue strokes lick you, and better yet, lick you again." That's the community that I grew up in. That was the norm for Nigeria. I went to school, we heard education was the key to success. So these were the you know, the kind of empowerment that we were receiving as children growing up in the primary school system in Jamaica. We were learning from we were children that there was all of this that education could do for us. And I think there was a transformation because I like to see a Jamaica where a man hits a woman on the street and ends up back before the court. I can tell you that did not happen when I was a child.
Actually, but also when you think about the homelessness, most men are realized in the streets. To think about it, a lot of men are close, right? But some of them honestly don't want. So they cope with it through smoking or being on the street. That's why you see most men on the road, right? You see a lot of females now in business places trying to take over because when you think about it, a lot of females want to be, a lot of females want to, let's say, they want to be away from something because they think that because when they're younger, they see women man being a woman. So they want to be by themselves instead of being a man to depend on a man. So a lot of them don't focus to try to do something with their life. So a lot of the reasons why a lot of these bad things happen between man and woman is because of these little incidents from young age for men, for both boys and girls. So that's why I say a lot of most men smoking or drinking, but they want to be gone from reality, from the pressure that they're feeling. And so many in doing what in school because they don't want to have the same thing that their great grandmother or their grandmother had. And they get beat by a man or so.
Dr. Lee, a question about the parents feeling trapped. Do you think that that is because we no longer have the extended family and they don't have support of like, I mean, like I grew up, my maternal grandmother lived with us, you know, until she died. Even when my mother was ill, she was a strong helper. But so since they don't have, you know, like grandparents or aunts or uncles, is it that, you know, if we had more, if we went back to that, that would help to give them some more support?
I think so. The community has been eroded. Grandparents don't live with, families anymore. They sort of live on their own. Grandparents are also much younger, and they too are struggling, trying to equal their own existence, etc. But yes, if women had more support, they would feel less trapped and controlled, and would perhaps enjoy the experience more. So I would say yes to you.
North America, depending on your social status, you are able to have a successful career and still get time away from that successful career to go to the football matches of your children, basketball games, and all the other playtime for your children. But if you belong to other wrong social groups, there is no such time, because you are the one responsible for looking after those children, or manning the basketball match, or looking after the bathrooms while everybody else is at whatever the social event is. And as a consequence, the middle class families are able to have all of the time that they need to be with their children, whereas the lower income families struggle even to find time to sleep. My question is, for the Caribbean context, what is the possibility or the potential for us to build into the framework of the workplace and the work time for the care of the family? Because I don't see that. You work Monday to Friday, 8 o'clock to 8 p.m., go home tired. Your children have cooked for themselves and put themselves to bed already. The next time you will see them is when they're going out the door at 6, because you need to give them the lunch. That's a traditional Jamaican.
I think it depends on the social class. You raise a number of things. So one, the families, let me say that the families who are at the working class, lower middle income, they generally are more employed in the informal economy, where there is not social protection. They don't enjoy social protection support. So things such as sick leave with pay, they would chances not get maternity leave with pay as well, except they are contributing to the national insurance scheme, holiday with pay. So when COVID hit, those categories of workers were significantly affected. They had to put themselves at risk to still go out there to try and earn, because they did not have the social protection support. I would say for the middle and upper classes, there is also Lynette had put it nicely when she was referring to men. Their positions damage them as much as they privilege them. Because, I'm borrowing from you, because a lot of these jobs demand a pound of flesh from a lot of these middle and upper classes. So you can't just step away from work as you would like. You might enjoy the social protection support. You have a pension, you know, if you're sick, you get sick leave with pay, etc., etc. But at the same time, the demands of the job prevent you from being as accessible and available to your family as you may wish. But, you know, if for a long period you take vacation leave, or at least you have vacation or sick leave that you can use to step away. But for the low income and working class families, that is not, you know, they don't enjoy that quote unquote luxury. Yeah. I would say not just Caribbean, I think it is a problem maybe globally. The European societies have more support for family. They build that is built into their societies. But let us not forget that we now have parental leave, which came in 2022 or 23, January 1. So we are making progress. Men will enjoy it, and also parents who don't have biological children and are adopting. There is family leave, so get acquainted with. And that came in, I think, January 2023. Lynette talked about the in the biography that was read. Lynette and others pushed for the introduction of maternity leave in Jamaica in the 1970s. You know, my mother, all of us children were born in the 60s, and my mother said she had to take, she worked as a civil servant, so she took like, it was like, must say 3 days, whatever leave they called it, have the baby, and you're back to work the following week, pretty much. Yeah, that was what it was. Yeah. There was no maternity leave at the time. With my brother who is after me, I think she said the leave was now a little longer, but it was not even yet maternity leave. But those things didn't come. Jamaica got it when 1979, and those things didn't come into the smaller territories. By the way, I come from Grenada. So I'm talking about, you know, smaller Eastern Caribbean. I didn't get these benefits until maybe the 1980s. You know.
I just want to add one small thing. The fact is that the social economic framework of quote unquote development is what is going to determine what people can get. Now, the 1970s under Michael Manley, it was a period in which an experiment, a process of giving more benefits to the ordinary was taking place. That maternity leave, we had equal pay with equal work, we had no bastard for their end. All of those social and economic changes. But from the 80s, we have had a neoliberal framework, which is more a trickle down that says, as the economy progresses, we'll be able to trickle down and help people. If that is the framework, and therefore, whereas in the 1970s, we were asking for, and some companies set up daycare, by the 80s and the 90s, that's gone out. So the politics and the economic framework is what's going to determine those things, which is why, as instruments of righteousness, we have to frame our advocacy in that direction.
So at this time, we're going to ask our panelists to give their final remarks.
I don't know why I get to go first. Anyway, I think all I would want to say is everybody in society is going to have to work at making a change. And there will be men who feel threatened by increased opportunities for women, no question about it. I find it really strange that people don't see that relationships of justice are not, as we mathematicians say, zero-sum games. It's not if you win, I lose, or the other way around. Actually, if we create a just society, everybody wins. But that's a hard thing for people to see. And I think it's actually hardest for some of the people we need to help the most. So some of the people that you were talking about mentoring, the gentleman there, they are in those kinds of communities are going to in many cases find these things most threatening. But I also think all of these issues are so interlocking. As we improve one area, I really do believe other things will improve too. I think as we build a more just labor market, as we build a more just, all of these other things will, I think, improve, because as people see each other in the workplace in a certain way, they see each other in their home life in a similar kind of way. So I think these things are strongly related, and we should work in all of these areas, but we shouldn't be thinking that we have to win the day in all of these areas at once. As we make small progress, I think there has been, by the sounds of things, small progress. I think we will improve things over time.
Thank you. So I will add, I'm agreeing, and I think we've made big progress, over time. If you think of where we're coming from as post-colonial, post-slave societies, we have made big progress. And if you think of where we're coming from the period of independence to today, you will agree that we've made big progress. I think I'm supporting Father Peter, and I want to add that every stakeholder has to be at the table. You know, each one of us, the churches, the religious bodies, the state agencies, the private sector, the media. One of the agents we didn't talk about at all was the entertainment and music industry. They are a big influential sector, and they too need to be at the table, along with the transport sector as well, because they are the transporters of our young people, and they are the ones who play the music, and so on. And we talked about how subtle people learn things and are re-socialized and so on. It is through all of these, the images that we see from the media, and also the things that the music and entertainment space promotes. So we need all stakeholders at the table, not just the regulars, you would say, the NGO sector, the unions and the government and the private sector. You need the music and entertainment industry there too, and you need the media at the table and the transportation sector. All players.
Just to add on what has been said, to say that each one of us is an agent for that transformation, and that is where the hope lies. And therefore, things might look shady. Our school might be small at this stage, but don't go by the size only. Don't go by the, what we are involved now, but continue to build our consciousness and our connections. One of the great things of having a small space like yours is that you really can get to know each other as men and women and share experiences and challenge each other to be our better selves. And that is what the mission is about, because each of us has that mandate to be a change agent, and must begin with us. Thank you.
It has indeed been a fulfilling evening, and I'm sure that each of us will take something away from the presentations that you would have received from our analysts here. As we wind down, we invite one of our team members, John, to come and give the
Minister. God is good. Wow. I'm the only person I believe. No, not just me. But this presentation, somehow, the message was mine. Because where I come from, the society is arranged in a particular way. So as I was growing up, I remember going to play football. I would be free as opposed to my sister. And to be a man
is to be someone who want to rule and conquer, and to be able to say, let my voice be heard. But Jamaica and the Caribbean has given me a different perspective. I'm transformed. And so when I joined the religious life, when they asked me to begin to wash dishes, cook, it was the hardest thing in my life. It was a bit energetic. And I began to contemplate of going back to my say, look, I can't manage this life because I wasn't formed this particular way. Cooking, washing dishes, my clothes too. So it was a challenge, but God is beautiful. And so really and truly, on behalf of my teammates, by the way, I'm the only man in that class as well, which is a privilege. They have given me ample time with all my biases to say I need to learn. And so I've been learning. It's a gradual process, slowly by slowly. I believe I will be a better individual. So without wasting time, I would like to appreciate you all. I know as students, we are very demanding. If a student asks you to do something, they will be looking for you all the time. Where are you? It's ready, it's due. So I can understand the pressure, but thanks for showing up and supporting us. And we are truly grateful. And we love you all. May God bless you and pray for us. So I would like to call my teammates. We have a token for our panelists. I would like to call our lecturer. Please come forward. We'd like to invite Reverend Father Peter Hunter. Please receive a little token. Picture. Smile. Next online, Dr. Evan. Next online, I just forget the name. It says Lynette, but it's not correct. Excellent smile. Finally, what a beautiful evening. If you're not transformed, probably going to pray about it. I would like to thank you all for supporting us and turning up in big numbers. Please give yourselves a round of applause. Amen.
Friends, I invite us to give a round of applause to the class of 2024. Second year course, and we speak about what is the church's voice with respect to the socialism. And we've had, I think, quite a good year talking about a number of socialisms, but laying the framework for our students leaving the course, going out to be the agents of transformation. And I think we have learned quite a lot. We have shared quite a lot. We come from different countries. And I think that has really enriched the class, meaning that we have learned from each other, having a Ugandan perspective, St. Kitts and Guyana, and of course, Jamaican perspective. So we might just be 5 of us, but we're broad. And so we do want to extend our thanks. This has been the culmination of the course, and they do get a grade for putting this on after. And that's why they're so happy so many of you came over. But we want for you to realize that the point was to raise awareness. And sometimes we ask, what is the church doing? But a lot of the times, the most basic thing that we can do is to raise awareness about issues. And I know you have learned this evening, I certainly did. And I pray that as we go from here, that we will share, and that the hunger to learn more and to do more will drive us going forward in wherever God places us, to see the issues and to be courageous enough to ask, why are they like this? And how can we transform them so that everyone can experience the fullness of life that God has declared for each person. So I invite us, as you are able to stand, as we pray together, offering our God thanks for all that has been accomplished this evening. Let us pray. Holy and gracious God, you call us as your children, made in your image and likeness, to embody you, to embody your love and your care, to embody your justice and your desire for equality amongst your children wherever we are. And we are thankful for our discussion this evening, for opening our eyes to the facts, to the realities, and even to enable us to recall some of the good and some of the bad that impacts our brothers and sisters, our own families. But most importantly, as you have opened our hearts to care, to recognize that others matter, and that we should care about the well-being and the welfare of both women and men, boys and girls. May we go from here having an awakened frame of mind. May we go from here, O Lord, to be witnesses of your love. Witnesses who will go to spread the good news of transformation that we know you are more than able to do. For you are indeed the God who has transformed death into life and sin into righteousness. There is nothing greater than you, O God. And so we know that our communities, our families, our nation, and the world can be transformed until we all reflect your likeness. Bless us now as we go from here, O God. Bless us as we make our way to our rooms, our homes, wherever you take us. May we know that we take your image, your likeness. May we reflect you in our words, our care for others, and may we show others that they matter because they are your children too. We place ourselves in your care, and we ask your blessing to be poured out upon each one of us, our homes and our families. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you once again for coming out, and we'd like to acknowledge those who are online as well. We appreciate your presence. Please don't rush away, we have refreshments.